Hello everyone, welcome to today's session. In this session, we will be discussing about the software development process, and to begin with, we will discuss about the software development life cycle. So, software development life cycle, or primarily known as SDLC, basically this is a process which is used by the software industries to do the following steps: to design, develop and test a particular software. Now, this design, development and testing of this software essentially has to meet certain standards which will lead to a high quality product. The SDLC aims to produce a high quality software which meets or exceeds the customer expectations, reaches completion within times and also meet the cost estimates. So if we are considering high quality, essentially the customer expectations are associated, as well as the cost of the product is also taken into account, because if we are producing a high quality software for a very high cost, it might not be meeting the customer expectations as well as the budget requirements. So all of these we will be discussing about in our subsequent sessions. But as of now, we have to remember that in order to produce a high quality software along with the expectations of the customer, the cost of the product is also a mandatory factor, and also it has to meet certain standards. Now different softwares or different product have different standards. So in case of your softwares also, there is an international standard for development, and we have to make sure that this standard is met. Now talking about the conventional SDLC, so if we are considering the conventional SDLC, there are several steps which are there. So steps of SDLC if we are considering, so let us first consider talk about these steps, and later on we will be discussing what else can be incorporated to make it better. So it is a process followed for a software project within a particular software organization, and it will consist of a detailed plan on describing how to develop, maintain, replace and alter or enhance specific software, right? So in order to begin the development of a particular software, the first step is to plan for it. Okay, so planning is the first step of this particular SDLC conventional model. Okay, a typical software development life cycle begins with the planning for that particular software. The second one is we have to define what are the requirements for this particular software that we are going to develop. The third and one of the most important aspect of this particular process is designing. The fourth one is building or the development of this software, and mere building of the software will not suffice. We also have to test that particular software. Okay, and after testing we have to deploy it. Now all of these steps, they comes up with numerous methodologies or numerous processes which runs in the background. But for our as far as our course is concerned, we will not be focusing more into details of each of the steps, but we will have a basic understanding of each of the steps. So let us begin with the first step, that is the planning. So talking about the planning stage, so whenever there is a requirement, we have to understand that we have to plan for it. So planning basically is related to the requirement analysis. So if we are considering a particular software which is been about to be built, so we have to analyze the various requirements. Now, requirement analysis is basically the most important and fundamental stage of any software development life cycle, and it is basically performed by the senior members. Not that the junior members are not eligible. If they have requisite amount of experience in that field, they can do that. Otherwise, the senior members of the team, they give input, they take input from the customer, the sales department, the market surveys and the domain experts in the industry, and they calculate what will be the requirements for that particular software. Now this information is then used to plan the basic project approach and to conduct a product feasibility study in an economical, operational and technical areas. So once the input is given by these members, okay, so the senior members will give input, and this input will basically be comprising of different things like market surveys. Let's say we have customer as the primary stakeholder, and we also have the sales department. So all these inputs will be uh, provided by the different departments, and the senior member will be collecting those inputs, and this information, okay, this information is then used to conduct the feasibility study. Now it might be so that we might be asked to build a software for a rocket launching event, or we want to build a software for launching of a rocket. So that might not be possible for a small firm to work on it. Okay, for that we need requisite experience, definite manpower, as well as a lot of resources. So that particular software will not be possible for a small firm. So though that is basically analyzing the feasibility. So how we will analyze the feasibility? We will analyze the feasibility based on the information which is generated with different inputs given by the senior members of the team. Okay, also in this particular stage of planning, there are other aspects like quality assurance requirements and also the risk analysis. So all those things are taken care of in the planning stage of the software development life cycle. Next is defining the requirement. Now this defining, this second step, let us write it down in a different slide. Okay, the second step, which is basically defining of the requirements. This defining of the requirements is a very methodical way of representing the requirements in a documented form. So essentially we use a software requirement specification document. So this is basically software requirement specification document. So this document will be able to incorporate the different requirements which might be needed if the project is feasible. So once the requirement analysis is done, the next step is to clearly define and document the product requirements and get them approved from the customer or the market analysts. So this will basically be a documented form of whatever we have done in the previous step, and this document straightly goes to the customer or the analyst whether that those particular requirements are sufficient for the development of the project. If not, then there is a scope that you can always go ahead and make changes to this document, and this document will be a full and final version for the design phase and the development phase. The third step which we have is one of the very important steps, which is the design phase. So in this design phase, we basically use the SRS as a reference, which we have just generated in the second step, and this SRS will be the key factor in guiding the designing of the product. It is the reference for product architects to come out and the best architecture for the product to be developed. So based on this particular SRS, we will have a number of designs which could be generated for the same software. Usually more than one design, there is more than one design approach for the product architecture which is proposed, and all these proposals of different designs, they go to a design document, specification document, which is another document which will be taking care of the multiple pros and cons of the different designs. Now this DDS is again reviewed by all the important stakeholders, and based on various parameters like risk assessment, robustness, modularity of the design, budget, which is a primary factor, and time constraints, the best design is chosen. So this will again be reviewed by the different customers, senior members, as well as market analysts. So all of them will be reviewing this DDS, because this DDS will be having all these designs, and maybe if the best design is D2, so this design will be selected based on different constraints. Modularity will be one constraint, budget, whether it is fitting the budget, whether it will be completed within the definite time period or not. All those things will be considered in this particular phase, and the best design is forwarded. Now this design approach is, it clearly defines all the architectural modules of the product along with its communication and data flow representation with external and third party modules. These designs, they have a very clear layout in terms of data flow, how the data is going from one module to the another, who are the stakeholders, okay, what activities they are capable of doing, and what are different sequences in which the work is taking place within that particular software. Everything, much more than only these 4 points, much more than this, which are related to these services, are considered. Okay, we will of course do a few designs in our subsequent sessions, because these design diagrams, they form the basis of any project which you will be doing in your courses, as well as when you will be going for a real-time implementation of any project. Okay, so once this design is done, this DDS, after a particular design is selected, it is forwarded to the next phase, which is your building or development. So this is the actual implementation of the entire project. So in this stage of SDLC, the actual development starts and the product is built. So here the development, basically all your coding and all, it will start here. So development starts here. Essentially it will not end here, because this is like a never-ending process until the project is deployed, but the starting point definitely has to be in this particular step. The programming code is generated as per the DDS, which we have already generated in this stage, and if the design is performed in a detailed and organized manner, the code generation can be accomplished without much hassle or without much problem. Because if your DDS is well defined, you know how many people are going to use that software, what are the activities that particular software is able to support, then definitely we can easily code them. Okay, but there has to be certain coding guidelines which needs to be followed. Like, you simply cannot go ahead with implementing anything. Okay, there are definite coding guidelines which are defined by the organizations, and there are certain programming tools like compilers, interpreters, debuggers, etc., which will be used in order to generate the code. And there are also different languages like C, C++, Pascal, Java, and PHP. We have Python, which are used for coding. Okay, these particular languages and frameworks, they are basically chosen with respect to the type of software that you are going to develop. Okay, for a very simple, maybe a website, we do not need more than a PHP platform, or for a small application we can easily build it using Java, right? So those kind of softwares, if we want to develop, we have to actually choose which particular language we are comfortable with in development, and which will not involve much cost, or which will be within the budgetary limitation. So coding guidelines are an important aspect when we go ahead with the development stage. And the next stage which is there is the testing. So testing is basically a simultaneous activity which is carried out with development, and it is a subset of all the stages in the modern SDLC models. So it is basically a subset of the different SDLC models. So we will look into different SDLC models also. So different modern SDLC models. So there are just, what we are discussing now is just a conventional model, but there are derivations of these models, and all these different modern SDLC models, they have to support this testing step. They generally and they compulsorily support this testing stage, because it refers to testing only one stage of the product, where the product defects are reported, tracked, fixed and retested until the product reaches the quality standards which are defined in the SRS. Okay, so it is basically, as already mentioned, it is basically a simultaneous activity which is performed with testing. So which is performed with development. This has to be development, because as and when we are developing one module, we essentially go ahead and test that particular module, and that testing continues until and unless we meet the requisite standards which we have already mentioned in our software requirement specification. The next and one of the very important steps is deployment, because what testing takes place is basically for a single module or in a module wise manner. Okay, now deployment is basically a more formal implementation or a formal release of the product. So once the product is basically developed, it is tested and it is ready to be deployed, it is released formally in an appropriate market. Sometimes this product deployment happens in stages, like suppose I build a software, okay, a banking software. So initially what I'll do is I'll use only the customer module. Okay, so my banking software will have customer module. Then maybe this is in phase 1. So this is first, it is released and deployed. The second one, maybe I have a admin module. Okay, so this is maybe in phase 2. The third one maybe not an admin module comes in the very beginning, so I'll keep it here as a, let's say, a banker module. Okay, the third one maybe, let's say, I have a special user module. Okay, so this is I'm releasing in phase 3. Maybe in this particular the fourth one, I have a bonus module, so maybe I'm releasing it in phase 4. Maybe in fifth one, I have a fixed deposit module, so it is having a phase 5. Okay, it is released in phase 5. Likewise, maybe I have a loan module, so this has been released in phase 6. So likewise, my software can be deployed or released in a phase wise manner, or together this banking software could be released into the market. Okay, altogether also it can be released. It entirely depends upon the development team, that whether we want to release it, or and also the customer, whether they want it in a phase wise manner or it wants the entire software in one go. Okay, so the product may be first released in a limited segment and it is tested in real business environment, which is a very conventional way of releasing a product, because if my customer module is working fine, then only I can go ahead with implementation of the other modules. If there is problem in deployment or using the customer module in the real-time environment, then the product is not very much useful for deployment. So this this phase wise release and phase wise deployment is much preferred. However, we have to understand that this is an important aspect of the software development life cycle, because without this step we will not be able to launch it in the market, and based on the feedback from the market or from the users, the product may be released as it is or with suggested enhancement in targeting the market segment. So if we consider that the beta users of our Android phones, okay, Android operating system, so the beta users basically they are given a choice whether they can if they are satisfied with the current version of the update, and they can or they are not satisfied. If they are not satisfied, then they can simply report it to the development team, and they will make the changes accordingly before the final release of that particular version takes place. Okay, so they are basically the friendly users. So here also the deployment first starts with the friendly users, and later on it is released in the market for all types of users. So these are the 6 main and important steps which were involved in your software development life cycle, and essentially all the steps plays a major role in uh, design, development and deployment of a particular software in the market for use. Now, talking about this software development life cycle, we have to understand that there are several different types of software development life cycles which were built upon the conventional 6 steps which are associated with the traditional software development life cycle. Let us discuss some of them. We will just list it down here, and in the next video we can actually formally go ahead with explanation for some of them. So if we are considering the SDLC models, so this SDLC models, they can be categorized into waterfall model, which is one of the traditional and most sought after models for smaller projects. Okay, waterfall model. Then we have rapid application development model. We also have spiral model, and this is a very much used model when it comes to higher risk products or higher risk softwares. Then we have the V model. Sorry, we have the V model. So this is like an incremental model. However, it has some deviations, and we will discuss them. What are the deviations? Then we have an incremental model. We also have an agile model. Then we have an iterative model. And finally we have a big bang model. So these are just conventional widely used models in the industry nowadays, but there are other models also apart from this which are being used by different companies for their own use or for their own purpose. So we will not be discussing them now, but we have to remember that these are some of the models which are widely used and widely accepted in the software development industry currently. Okay, so this is all for this video. In the next video we will be talking about some of these models in details. Thank you.